Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security. Today we are going to compare the Purdue model against IEC 6443. And just in case you haven't seen it, just recently we had published an article on this topic on LinkedIn, and I think you can also find it on our blog and on X, comparing the Purdue model and IEC 6243 for network segregation in OT security. So just in case you prefer reading over than watching a webcast, this is your reference. However, it's pretty brief, and I want to reflect more in detail about on a couple of key differences. So why are we even talking about network segregation in OT security? Very simple. You need it. Without network segregation, you will not go very far in OT security. That's the long and short of it. Why is that the case? Because endpoint security only gives you so much. You have all the OT devices which are insecure by design. They don't have any authentication, authorization, all that good stuff. It's missing. And when you look at the Windows boxes, you see very outdated operating system versions, boxes that haven't been patched for a couple of years, in many cases because you can, since the operating system version, such as Windows 7, is obsolete, and there are no longer any patches available. And the irony is, in some cases, when you think about endpoint security, it isn't even due to that it would be so complicated and difficult, because everybody knows what it takes to upgrade a Windows 7 box or Windows XP box, for that matter, to something that's more modern. That's a stretch. However, there are some low-hanging fruits in endpoint security, such as make sure that your web browsers are updated. But apparently, even that is too much to ask for many OT environments. So no matter how you put it, at the end of the day, you will not get around network security when you want to get anywhere in OT security to reach any decent level of OT security posture. And for that, we would appreciate some guidance. Many people in the industry think that the Purdue model delivers such guidance. Unfortunately, they are mistaken, as I have explained a couple of times, and I will explain it again, but only very briefly, because I have already spent a lot of time talking about this. So what is the problem with the Purdue model? First of all, it was never designed to be a network segregation model. And you can see that by the simple fact that maybe the best idea when it comes to Purdue is the introduction of the level 3.5, which is the DMZ. And just as the name suggests, it was added later to the model. And that is the DMZ that separates the enterprise network from your process networks. That is a very important concept that certainly by now every asset owner should have picked up already. The other implications of Purdue, as far as it is applied to OT security, are a bit misleading in this man's opinion, because Purdue assumes a very strict north-south segregation, which is based on the different types of devices that you find in a factory automation environment. So you have the sensors and the actuators. They're at the very bottom in this level 0. And then you have things like the PLCs that are in level 1, and so it goes until you hit the level 3.5. So that is the layers, the levels are based on the device type that can be associated with a function, like a controller, or we know what it does. It controls a physical process, which is something that usually a computer cannot do, or an HMI, right? But certainly this is a very vague categorization, and this leads to the fact that in some cases, or if not in many cases, you would struggle to say, if you just look at a computer, well, at which Purdue layer is it? Where is it situated? Because it could be in level 2. If it acts as an HMI, it could be in level 3. It could be in level 3.5. It could be within the DMZ. So, and that gets many people confused, and they're reaching out for help, and therefore we have all these many discussions. The one thing that you will always see in those discussions, that there is such a divergence of opinion. So I pointed that out a couple of times. Some people don't even talk about a layer 3.5, and then they 4, 5, and 6, and so there is a lot of discussion that in my opinion is simply useless. No matter how you put it, you can certainly always try to interpret Purdue as long as you want, but you will never reach any good level of guidance, at least not with the model as it presently is. And so don't get me wrong, I want to give credit. Let me just show you. So I'm getting back to that article that we have published recently. And we have one of the people who commented is Gary Rathwell, who apparently works with PERA, and he tells me and he tells us that they're in the process of improving the model for cybersecurity guidance. So, well, let's follow that effort if you want to. But then on the other hand, I would ask why? Because we already have a pretty decent baseline model with 62443, which is what I'll get into in a couple of minutes. Why would you want to do that? Because in my opinion, there's already a much more mature guideline, which is 62443. So why bother just modernizing PERA and continue all this discussion on how it would be implemented correctly and whatnot? But before we do that, let me point out again the major problem with the Purdue model as it used to be. Maybe these improvements will lead to something different, but the major problem was, if you really do horizontal segregation, like north-south, right? That doesn't give you anything in OT security. And this is something that was properly understood by 62443, or ISA 99 as it was called back in the days. So the major difference between 62443 and Purdue is that when 62443 introduces the idea where you have to do some segmentation, they don't stick it to those very strict layers. So instead, they introduce the concept of zones, of security zones. And the interesting thing is that this concept is abstract. That means your zones may be limited to one Purdue level, but they might already go across different Purdue levels. And if you haven't seen it before, just to give you an idea, this is one of the reference diagrams in 62443. I hope they will not sue me now, because this is from my licensed copy of the standard, and I'm actually not supposed to show this, so I probably should put it away rather quickly. But so as you probably know, you have to pay for licensing the documents, and this is a one person. I just hope that this is not detailed enough so that all of you still buy the standard publication. But let me show you quickly once more. So here you see a diagram where you have 1, 2, 3 from the north-south perspective, different zones, and the overall layout certainly is very, very similar to Purdue, because down here you have the IOs, the sensors, and the actuators. Then you have the controllers. So that resembles some ideas of Purdue. However, let me be clear: IEC 62443 does not reference Purdue. And I think they're doing good for not referencing Purdue. So just as an idea, you can actually talk sensibly about network segregation in OT without referencing Purdue. This is one of the nice things about 62443. But the important thing is those zones like the Plan C control zone, obviously they stretch over multiple Purdue layers. And that is a good thing, my friends. The major difference or the big thing here that you see is this is introducing east-west segregation. Unfortunately, and this is an issue that I have with many of these documents, they're always way too oversimplified. They're simply oversimplified. And because they're talking about a whole plant here, and that plant seems to only have 2 controllers. I haven't seen such a plant, right? So that might be a tiny sewage plant, water treatment facility or something like that. And why do I point this out? Because if you want to really get an idea of the capabilities of a certain model or concept, like the zoning concept in this case, try to apply to a real-world scenario where you have, let's just say, 20 machine lines with all the additional infrastructure, and see how that looks like. Does it still make sense? And that is something that unfortunately they did not do. The other thing that I want to point out before I hide that diagram again in order not to get sued to death by the IEC is what you see here. The enterprise zone, it covers everything. And then there is this for each plant, there is an individual zone, and within the plant, you have the control zone. So, in other words, this segregation concept is abstract. It is not tied to specific device types, and that's a good thing. I'm struggling to understand why they think the inclusion of zones is important. So the idea is that a zone inherits characteristics of the parent zone. Yeah, I get it, but on the other hand, I've never seen it playing out in real life. So I think in that particular model, you wouldn't lose anything if you say, well, plant C, the control zone, is a different zone than the plant C zone. And they have just different requirements and characteristics. But anyhow, so that is implied by the concept that you can do this cascading, and you would have the inheritance, even though I haven't seen it play out. So then you have the conduits. That is certainly also something that's missing in Purdue. The idea or the concept of the conduits, it's not, in this man's opinion, quite striking, because they tell you, oh, a conduit is a zone that cannot contain other zones. So guys, come on, then why even introduce the other term? But I think everybody gets it. So this is about the network pathways, etc., etc. So in my opinion, much more relevant to what we're doing. And I found one interesting blog post. Let me show you that again. That is the safe material that I can show without getting sued. That's by ISA, and just keep in mind, ISA 99 was the original organization that developed the standard until it was overtaken by IEC. So this is about how to define zones and conduits. And I really like this diagram here because it shows the striking, or one of the striking differences between Purdue and 62443. This is bad here. That's bad with the red X, and I've pointed that out many times. You must go to east-west segregation, my friends. That is super important. This is how it's done with a green check mark. that is what you want to see, that your your zones and the conduits don't cover those east-west entities or units. And this is going to get us later to one of the problems that I see with IEC with 62443. So very striking differences. And let's go a little bit more into detail here. The idea of how you define a zone in 62443 is based on risk, the term that everybody loves in OT security, except this man. In case you didn't know, I have written a book on OT security. It's called Robust Control System Networks. I think it was published 2011 or 2012. Where I talk about network segregation and other things without ever stressing the term risk. Only in the preface, I explain why I'm not using risk, but I'm just saying. But anyhow, so the definition of zones is based on your risk assessment. And then 62443 introduces this idea of target security levels. That are even enumerated, like 1, 2, 3, etc. And I think that was not a good idea. And the irony is that the person who came up with this idea, my friend Brian Singer, he used to be chairman of ISA 99. He even, shortly after he had introduced the idea, oh, I think, no, that was not a good idea. And I think that you would find an S4 talk by Brian when he introduced this concept that was then picked up by ISA 99. But he wasn't very much favorable of that. I don't know if he has changed his mind since then, but let me put it this way. I think it's a little bit counterproductive because it goes a little bit too far. It's too simplistic, especially because it also talks about, well, if you have to factor in nation state threat actors, then you should be at security level 3 or something, right? And that absolutely does not make sense to me. But this is just me. Maybe you find some value in it. So my point here is, as usually, you should treat those standards or any other guidance documents with a grain of salt. Maybe the best advice that I could give you when you want to go ahead in OT security, be as eclecticistic as you can. And that means just grab anything you can use or you find useful from this standard, that standard. Never try to follow the true teaching. Right? Never try to fully implement a specific standard. Always check what makes sense for your specific scenario. And nobody cares if at the end of the day you find something like a patchwork, if you can demonstrate that this actually did move the needle and that your security posture became so much higher. So the target security levels, no, I don't think that this is really a good idea. So how should you define your zones then? That is the $1,000 question. And I think there is a way, and that way works pretty well. We have seen it many times in real life. And this allows me to go back to that LinkedIn article because we have a very astute comment here. First comment by Ruth Welschen. Hi, Ralph. How about taking ISA 95 into this picture? Banger, Ruth, you nailed it. That is the missing piece. That is going to go a long way for defining your zones. So I'm not going to to elaborate on 95 here because you just check it out for yourself, right? So it's not difficult to find. In a nutshell, it's just the idea that you can and should build a functional model of your production processes. And it comes with a lot of good concepts. You don't even have to pay for it, so you will find a lot of guidance for free on the internet. ISA 95 is what I suggest to use for your zoning efforts, for creating your zones. And if you do that, you will arrive at very different network segregation models than you would by just following Purdue. It's going to be much more granular, and it's going to go so much further. So let me just give you one idea here. The whole idea with the security levels and that zoning within 62443 is pretty much focused on a single device. Oh, you know, this is a safety controller, so this is a very high risk, etc., etc. Yeah, maybe. However, the risk, now even I'm using the term risk, that I believe you should focus on more is business continuity. So when you think about the whole plant goes down due to some malware infestation or due to some ransomware, that is what you should focus on. And so business continuity becomes much more of a problem. So let me put it this way: if you have to fear that your safety controllers could be impacted by some cyber attack, you should go back to ground school or to kindergarten, because then obviously you have failed to learn the most basic lessons on how to use safety equipment in a networked factory automation environment. So that should no longer be your problem. And I know that some companies still struggle. That was the problem with the Triconix attack, that it was about the network architecture. The network architecture was simply fucked up. They thought they had a DMZ when in fact they did not. Anyhow, so getting back to business continuity, the question is, don't think about the impact when that specific thing, it could be a safety impact, right? So think about the function for the production process, and that takes you directly to ISA 95, because ISA 95 allows you, or even urges you, to model your production processes from the site level down to the work cell level. And if you do that properly, guess what you got? You got your zones already, because you will clearly be able to identify, okay, now here I have machine line 1. Wouldn't it be great if that machine line now no longer functions because of some contractor who came with his laptop and did some project changes, but he also infected let's just say the engineering station with malware. Okay, wouldn't it be great if machine lines 2 to 9 would not be affected by that? So in other words, the idea of containment, my friends, is not nearly as well addressed in 62443 as I would like to see it, or as I would think is appropriate. Containment of a threat that's already in there. So we assume worst case. You have been compromised. In order to do that, then it becomes very important to try with your segregation strategy to contain this threat within the smallest entity possible. That could be that machine line. Then if that machine, in that machine line, within that machine line, if then, let's just say not just the one engineering station is infected, but also 2 HMIs, well, who cares? Because it's already too late, okay? However, if you consider that this malware would be able to spread, especially east-west, that is your big problem, your risk, if you will. And that is what you want to prevent. So here's my bottom line. When you search for segregation advice, which you should, because endpoint security will only get you this far. Please, for the love of God, spend your time on 62443. Ignore Purdue until our good man Gary comes up with his improvements. And I know that Gary is not alone in this effort, so they got a whole team working on that. Maybe then we will reconsider Purdue. But at this point in time, since we can only do so much, I would give you the advice to focus on 62443, even though it's a pain in the ass that you have to license those documents. It will give you much more guidance that actually makes a difference, much more proper guidance. But just keep in mind that it's probably not going to be good enough. So you will need some additional inputs, such as ISA 95, in order to really make it happen. On the other hand, there are so many consultancies around now who offer services for 62443 implementation that I think it shouldn't be too difficult to get help when you need it. My last point about 62443, because I don't want you to get the impression that I am a 62443 fanboy. Be very deliberate in what you pick up. There are, as a matter of fact, so many topics within 62443 where I say, guys, for real? Didn't you have anything better to do? So it tends in some areas to over specify certain things, and also to come up with concepts and solutions for which we still have to find the problem for. So be very deliberate in what you pick up. Always be eclecticistic. Like you pick what you can use and you ignore the other stuff. So that is what I wanted to talk about. We don't have any comments, criticism, cheers. Okay, and then I'll just leave you with that. Bye-bye.